Welcome home, my child. Welcome home, where you belong.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. I'm Alex Torch Kumpf, and today we're going to continue talking about Jesus as the Messiah and Jesus as the priest. And I'm going to start off in John chapter 2, verse 13 through 21. And it says, "When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove them all out of the temple area, both the sheep and the cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves he said, 'Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market?' His disciples remembered that it was written, 'Zeal for your house will consume me.' Then the Jews demanded of him, 'What miraculous sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?' And Jesus answered them, 'Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days.'" And of course, the temple he was talking about wasn't the physical building. He was talking about his body, and that they're going to destroy his body, and he's going to raise from the dead in 3 days. See, one of the ideas of the Messiah coming was they thought the Messiah would build a temple. But in the first century, that's not what the people were expecting the Messiah to do, because why? There was already a temple built in Jerusalem. One stood there in the middle of the city. So what were they looking for the Messiah to do was not to rebuild the temple, but more to restore the temple. Because you see, the temple was a place where people were supposed to experience the grace and forgiveness of sin. Now, how did this happen? Well, what would happen is, according to the law, is people were supposed to bring an animal to the priest. And if the priest found that animal acceptable, the people would lay their hands on the animal and confess their sin over the animal. That way, the animal would take the sin, and the priest would go and sacrifice the animal and kill it for the forgiveness of sins. Now, why was Jesus so upset when he entered the temple? I mean, isn't this a good thing, getting the forgiveness of sins? Well, the problem is that during the first century, the temple became very corrupt, and it became these business corrupt practices. And so what would happen is, when a person would bring an animal to the priest would say, "No, sorry, your animal isn't good enough. It doesn't meet our regulations. What you need to do is you need to go buy one of our more expensive animals, and we're going to tax you on it because there's a temple tax." So what would happen is they turned the temple from a place of worship into a place of business, and they would rip people off, and sometimes people would have to go away without receiving the sacrifice for sin because they just couldn't afford the animal. Well, this is why Jesus got so upset, and he drove them all out. He said, "Quit robbing people. Quit turning my Father's house into a place of market." Now, what happened was God came up with a better idea for all this. And God decided that Jesus will become the animal, that Jesus would become the Lamb of God, and he would take the sin of the people, and God would put all the sins of all the people upon him, and Jesus would die as a sacrifice for sin to fulfill the law and to fulfill the justice and the mercy of God. So, and then what that would mean is that because we have the forgiveness of God, God's Spirit can live inside of us, and we become living, active, breathing temples of God. And Paul states this in 2 Corinthians 6:16 when he says, "For we are temples of the living God, and God moves and breathes inside of us." So what does this mean today? Here's the point I want you to take home today. If the temple was a center where people experienced the grace of God, and God calls us temples, then how am I being a center where people can experience the grace of God? Well, that's all the time we have today. We'll see you next week as we continue Jesus the Messiah.
Welcome home.